Well, good evening. My name is Patrick T. Smith. I'm an associate research professor of theological ethics and bioethics at Duke University Divinity School. I also direct the bioethics program at the Trent Center for Bioethics, Humanities, and History of Medicine. I want to take this moment to welcome you to our webinar this evening. I am so glad that you're able to join us for our discussion of Dean Luke Powery's recent book, Becoming Human, the Holy Spirit and the Rhetoric of Race. For our panel discussion, Dean Powery, an associate professor of homiletics at Duke Divinity School, will be joined by two leading scholars in fields that are important to the book. The Reverend Dr. William James Jennings is an associate professor of systematic theology and Africana studies at Yale University Divinity School, and Dr. Charmaine Royal, the Robert O. Keohane Professor of African and African American Studies, Biology, Global Health, and Family Medicine and Community Health at Duke University. I have the privilege and pleasure of serving as the moderator for this conversation. In Becoming Human, Dean Powery contrasts a view of humanity that sees race as essential and valuing some bodies over others with a theological understanding of humanity that is shaped by the biblical account of Pentecost, that sees the diversity of human bodies as one of the gifts of the Holy Spirit. Published by Westminster John Knox Press and the winner of the 2023 Book of the Year Award from the Academy of Parish Clergy, the book gets its title from the 1968 eulogy for the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., given by the theologian Dr. Howard Thurman, when he says, Dr. King was killed in one sense because humankind is not quite human yet, Dr. Thurman said. May he live because all of us in America are closer to becoming human than ever before. And as Dr. Powery says many times in his book, the turn to the spirit is the turn to becoming much more human. Now, we will begin with some conversation with Dr. Powery and then invite our panelists into the discussion. We will have some time at the end to take questions for those of you who are in attendance. So please feel free to submit your questions at any time during our conversation in the question and answer box that you can see at the bottom of your screen. We will get to as many of those as we possibly can. I'll do my very best in that regard. So let's just get to it. So I want to welcome each of you here. So glad to see you in this space. Dean Powery, first of all, congratulations on the publication of your book and the recent award.
Thanks so much, Dr. Smith.
Oh, absolutely.
Good. So good to be here. And it's a joy for me to be in this conversation with my dear friends and colleagues and these esteemed scholars.
Oh, wow. Well, that's great. Well, hey, why don't you just begin by telling us why you wrote this book?
All right. I'll make it short. You quoted Howard Thurman because that's where I was going to begin. In his memoriam for Dr. King, that we are not quite human yet. We are becoming human. And he does that in the wake of the assassination of Dr. King. And as we continue to see in our time, the ongoing violence against Blackness, war, hatred, tension, struggle, it continues inside the church and outside of the church, especially as it relates to what I call racialization, racism, and this concept of race. And so what I tried to do is really, we have one of the key thinkers in theology and race, Dr. Jennings, on this call. And what I tried to do is add a particular contribution theologically, pneumatologically, thinking about the work of the Spirit in relation to racialization in the history of the church and the world. And it was also, I would say there would be sighs of hope underneath the words of the book. And one of the hopes is that we would, as I draw on Pentecost as a metaphor, that we would find a new tongue. We would find a new language, a new way of engaging one another, but talking about one another and talking about this idea, this social construct of race. And so the prayer in many ways undergirding this book is that we would discover and become more fully human with each other. And ultimately, that can only happen through the work of the Spirit. And so it's a invocation for the Spirit to come and to help us in this endeavor and in this challenge, ongoing challenge.
Yeah, it was interesting, as you mentioned, throughout the book, this dynamic between the Spirit's work in kind of transcending some of these challenges that we are facing and bringing folks together, but also it is still deeply immanent and deeply involved and embodied in various ways. And this universal, the particular that the Spirit of this pneumatological turn helps captures for us. Yeah. Dr. Jennings, welcome to you. We're so glad to see you in this space.
Joy to be here. Joy to be here.
Wonderful.
This fine book.
Yes, indeed. And before we have you comment on the book, could you just share with the audience here a little bit about your scholarship and research, just a little bit about what you do, what you spend your time thinking about?
I spend my time thinking about God.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a theologian and I teach theology and Africana studies. So I spend my time thinking about matters of race and Christianity and the built environment and the environment more generally speaking. But I'm especially interested in helping Christians helping everyone think about the problems of the racial condition. As I like to say, Christianity, modern Christianity has a racial architecture, and modern racial reasoning has a Christian architecture. And so I'm very much interested in helping people think together about these two realities of the built environment.
Very good. Thank you. So look, you've written extensively, as you just noted, at the intersection of race, racism, whiteness, and theology.
Mm-hmm.
And readers of Becoming Human will notice Dean Powery engaged extensively your scholarship on these topics. How does this book, Becoming Human, fit into that discourse as you have researched it and spoken about it and written about it over the years?
Well, this is an extraordinary book. I don't want the author to blush as I'm talking about the but it's an extraordinary book because for two primary reasons. One, it's the particular location from which Dean Powery is thinking this. He mentioned Howard Thurman earlier, and it's so appropriate that he has begun with Thurman because in many ways, there's a Thurman-like vision that drives this fantastic text, especially in terms of being at a site of leadership that is a predominantly white site, and to be in a chapel, as Howard Thurman was, in a chapel, trying to speak a word of faith that would speak against the kind of racial faith that so many people have. And so to do that work and to try to think not only about race, but the dehumanizing reality of it from a site where people are always given the choice to either look at it or look away, it's very important. And what's so powerful about Becoming Human is that Luke speaks at the sight of people, in the presence of people who always have that choice to take the racial reality seriously, and in that way to either continue to inhabit it happily or to try to think a life of faith that moves against its realities of privilege and power. And so it fits beautifully. The way it also fits so beautifully is the way in which Luke understands that somebody made this up. But there is a fundamental constructed reality. But as we've learned over the last 25 years, even to say that something is constructed doesn't yet bring us to the point of helping people walk away from how compelling that construction is. To say that somebody has built a house is not to say that people want to stop living in that house. And it's very clear in the way he lays this out that there is a way out, but it requires a kind of a fundamental yielding to the Spirit. And I think that is at heart the theological intervention that Luke Powery is making in this book. What does it mean from the site of a university chapel? And we can think about university chapels across this country. What does it mean from the site of a university chapel? Preaching to those who inhabit such wonderful places, to say to them that there must be a yielding to the Spirit, that there must be a turning to the Spirit. And that for me is not only worth the price of the book, but it certainly is the reason we have to pause and think about what Dr. Pari is putting on the table.
Wow, very good. Thank you. Dr.
is why
Royal. Yeah,
why I
please,
asked
please,
Dr.
Dr. Pari.
This is why I asked Dr. Jennings to write the foreword.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, that's forward.
Oh my gosh. Indeed, it was a powerful forward at that for a very powerful book. Dr. Royal, good to see you, my
Good to
friend.
see you, Dr.
Uh,
Smith.
As you know, I'm fascinated by your work and have relied on your research in my own work in scholarship. And I would just like for you just to begin by sharing with those in this space a bit about what you do. All right. A lot of people may not know about your center, some of the other research that you do. Just share with us a little bit about who you are and your work.
All right. So thank you, Patrick. And thanks again, Luke, for inviting me to be part of this conversation. I'm so delighted to be here and to talk with you all about this really, truly powerful book. In terms of my work, so I am trained in human genetics. I in human genetics and bioethics, and my research and scholarship, my career broadly focuses on the ethical and social implications of human genetics. What does it mean to have genetic information? Who has access to it? How do we understand it? But I have a particular focus on issues at the intersection of race and genetics. What genetics and biology as a science tell us or not about race, and what does that mean for how we conduct research, for how we provide healthcare, and for how we live in society. That is my work. And as a Christ follower, my work is intertwined with my faith. And so the intersections of faith and science and race that's really at the heart of what I do and why I do it, as Professor Jennings talked about, to help people understand what race is, what it's not, but as a church to help us understand our role and our responsibility and obligation to help address the pernicious effects of race and racism.
Very good. Thank you. Dr. Royal, as someone coming from a more scientific background, what stood out to you about this book from Dean Pari?
Wow, so many things. I would say as a scientist, the humanities and the arts were alive in this book. Pneumatology and homiletics, I was in those classes 101, homiletics 101 and pneumatology 101. I went to seminary and I'm back. Luke, thank you very much. I learned so much about homiletics and preaching and the Holy Spirit. And I'm so grateful for that. My dad was a preacher, but I didn't get all this background living with my dad and growing up with dad. So now I have all this seminary background to back up for a lot of what he did. But I really loved, I'll get to the content in a minute, but I really loved your integration of the musical titles, the arts. I'm just a lover of the arts and the musical titles, the songs, the poem, Maya Angelou's poem, The Human Family, which is one of my favorite poems in thinking about race and biology, and the stories, those fascinating stories. The story about the woman from Johannesburg and on that flight and needing to move, the story about Naomi and Gladys, a powerful story of love and friendship and the Holy Spirit, and how just caring for one another and through song, and how, that story really meant a lot to me because my dad had Alzheimer's disease. He's gone now. And I remember Dad, as his disease progressed, he may not have remembered us, but he remembered the songs, he remembered the scriptures, and he would quote the scriptures. Even if he didn't know who he was talking to, he knew God, and he knew that God knew who he was. So the stories, and then the two disabled veterans, the togetherness in terms of one with lost a left hand, one a right hand, but they were clapping. So the stories that they were so powerful, Luke, and they brought across the messages that you were trying to make so well.
Mhm.
But so one of the things that I really appreciated is you're talking about unity versus uniformity, and that God calls us to unity, and that unity comes out of diversity, right? And that uniformity, it reminds me of Tony Evans's message about God calling us to oneness, not sameness. And it's the same idea that he wants us to be one and to be in unity. And that is such a powerful message for us to figure out how we do that, how we do that. And then Pentecost, comparing Pentecost with the Tower of Babel. I never really thought of those as being so different, in terms of Pentecost, different tongues, but the unity there, whereas the Tower of Babel was confusion. And finally, I felt your passion and the lament for the church, and for the church to embody the Holy Spirit and to begin to do what it is called to do, what we ought to do as the church. And I felt your passion because it is so much in line with mine, Luke, and you talking about us needing to call out racism as a sin and recognize the need for redemption and reconciliation. And I would go further and say, and transformation, not only of individuals' lives, but transformation of the church itself. And so some of those are some of the things that I found so powerful.
Well, it's beautiful. And it's interesting that as you're talking about the homiletics part and going to seminary, and I would imagine now that you probably never hear a sermon the same way again, right?
I know I won't.
Thinking about those kinds of analyses, right, in terms of what's really happening and what's going on in those moments. And you talked about the role of the church and this passion that comes up and this heart for the church. Dr. Jennings, you mentioned in your comments as well, the site of where Dean Powery is located and why all of that is so important and insightful for not only the context, but the text itself. So Dean Powery, in light of all of that, to what extent did your role as Dean of Duke Chapel actually shape the content of this book for you?
Oh, yeah. The pneumatology, the spirit blew me here. So the spirit was at work before I right?
Breath.
And it is the spirit that has kept me here. That's why I remain.
I'm sorry, Dean Powery, you need a third point in the alliteration, right? So you gave us two, but you need one more, right?
Don't get me started.
We'll take him out when it's time.
Right.
Not time yet, though.
That's right.
But what Charmaine was talking about, the stories, I think the context here, you have to understand, and some of this is weaved throughout the book. When I came, I made it a point. There was a lot of interviews, a lot of attention coming in as the first Black dean of the chapel. And, there was always that adjective in the interviews, Black dean of the chapel, right? Mm-hmm. And I had to stop people sometimes and say, I am human, though. I had to remind them I am human. And then during the various years, I've been here 10 years, there's been various episodes like that happen across the nation, racist incidents on campus, but particularly a couple stand out where a noose was hung on outside of the Bryan Student Center early in the morning, 2 a.m. in the morning, on the same day, April Fool's, it was April 1, on the same day that James Cone was coming to lecture. the Black theologian, and his title was The Cry of Black Blood,
Yes.
right? Caught up in that. There ended up being 1,000 people on the quad in front of the chapel. The president had to speak and others because of what broke out during that day over that noose that was hanging. Episodes caught up. We've been caught up here in all of the arguments and debates around Confederate monuments.
Mhm.
Post Charlottesville,
Yes.
the Robert E. Lee statue was removed from the front of the entrance of Duke Chapel. So being thrust into it, in many ways, I've been thrust into this conversation by the experience here. And Charmaine talked about a story. There's a story in the book that happened in 2014. So I hadn't even completed 2 years. And we had Raphael Warnock, who's now the senator in Georgia, but he was the pastor at Ebenezer Baptist Church, still is. He came to preach, and his choir, or at least portions of his choir, came to provide music. And my daughter, Mariah, was 12 at the time. And what I heard from her after the service at home really was something that I kept within myself for a few years. I did not go public, so to speak, with it, because she had leaned over. What I learned when I got home is that she had leaned over to my wife during that service and asked, "Is Daddy going to get fired?" It wasn't that it was anything different historically in terms of having a Black minister come. That had happened. That stretches way back.
Right.
But there was something about the collective Blackness on that morning, the choir, the music, the sounds, which was in many ways unusual. It's not the normative,
Yes.
right, at Duke Chapel, that a 12-year-old girl would raise the question that because of this presence, this sound, the sights, somehow she had to raise the question that Daddy was going to get fired. Is Daddy going to get fired? What would make a 12-year-old girl even, no one said anything to her, but what are the signs, the cues, the liturgical police, the white gaze somehow that she sensed as a little girl, my daughter?
Right.
And that took me on a journey, a quiet journey. Many centering moments, as Thurman would say, ponder and to struggle with God, to wonder, why in the world did God bring me here? And what I've learned on this journey is something James Forbes said to me on the phone in the summer of 2018, after some issues happening. And he said to me, he said, "You're a missionary of the Spirit."
Yeah. What?
And when he said that,
That's good.
everything made sense to me.
Hmm.
Because you're kind of in, but you're not in. The liminal space. You kind of talk the language, but you don't really talk the language, even if you learn the language. And so you're the other. And so when he said that to me, everything made sense to me. And so the context here most definitely has shaped the stories, the reality, the yearning, the sighs too deep for words, the inarticulate groanings of a university chapel that Dr. Jennings referred to, and Howard Thurman, that strand. It's an experiment of the Spirit. Can we truly discover the common ground? It's an experiment. It's an experiment, and so in so many ways, there are so many stories, so many realities, ones I've told and ones I keep to myself about the journey with God and for God. And so most definitely, Patrick, this place has been a part of the shaping of this book. And in many ways, this book is a call, is an invocation for the Spirit to come here in this place in Durham, North Carolina, at Duke University
Hmm.
to blow a new wind, to blow new life in the Valley of Dry Bones.
Hmm.
And so most definitely, most
Hmm.
definitely.
You know,
Wow.
I think that that's, Luke, that's another reason why this book teaches so beautifully, because you have named not only the dilemma that meets so many folk who are in university chapels, but so many people preaching today. Preaching today, especially in America, is extremely difficult. And as I mentioned in the forward, it calls for a level of courage that's unprecedented now, especially if you want to touch the racial fabric of the Western world. You have to have courage now, because so many people, as we know, I mean, we are right in the middle of this right now. So many people are deeply alarmed, overly sensitive to even touching the fabric of whiteness. To even say the word whiteness, for some people, is just, it's already, as I like to say, it's already hate speech. And so to even begin to point to the problems of race and racism, and to talk about the constructed nature of a comfortable whiteness, for so many people is profoundly threatening. And I think for so many ministers there, as you are, doing your work, not only in the chapel, but let's not forget you are also professor of homiletics in the divinity school, trying to teach students to step forward in courage and honesty, and weave the prophetic into the pastoral and the pastoral into the prophetic. That's an incredibly difficult task. And what's so great about what you're doing, especially in this text, is that in many ways, you're giving students a kind of template to think through what it means, as we like to say now, to speak truth to power, even in the presence of people who don't think they have power, but in point of fact, they do. And to do so consistently, faithfully, week in and week out, year in and year out, which for so many students, so many pastors, that's the problem. Because in America, race has a way of wearing you down. It has a way of wearing you down, especially if you're a minister. You get up and you talk about it once a year on King Day, talk about it every now and then, but you don't want to keep coming back to it, because after a while, folks are going to start looking at their watch like, okay, this is the third sermon on the racial condition we've heard this year. Okay, I think that's enough, don't you think, Pastor? And the reality of it is that for so many in this country, they have not yet yielded to the work of the Spirit, which would mean they have not yet allowed the Spirit to exorcise out of them that which oppresses them.
Yeah, I so appreciate that, Dr. Jennings. And you use the word courage, and that is what I thought of when I read this book. I thought, and Luke, you were talking about your daughter, and you asking the question, why am I here? And as I read this book, I thought, he is the dean of the chapel at Duke for such a time as this. For such a time as this. And the messages from that book are so powerful, and your authenticity just came through, and I just feel that an awakening is coming.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, Dr. Jennings, you talked about this just a moment ago in terms of this notion of courage, and even in your foreword, which I would encourage everyone who's listening, if you don't have the book yet, to encourage you to get it and make sure that they read your foreword. But in that foreword, how did you see yourself as helping the reader approach this book, right? Because there are supposedly tasks, right, that people who write forewords are supposed to have, right, in terms of setting up the book. What was going on with you in terms of your thinking and setting up this book?
But Luke is subtle, and he has to be, because he's in a site where subtlety is an important part of speaking to people. And I wanted to make sure that people didn't miss something because it was subtly stated. And I also wanted, in doing that, I wanted to make sure, as we've been talking about, to set the stage that Luke Powery stands in the direct lineage of people like Howard Thurman, who from sites where Black bodies have not been normally seen and not been understood as founts of wisdom, that here stands someone exactly in that legacy. And therefore, hear ye him, but also see ye him. See from where he is standing to do this. And so, you know, anytime you write a forward, what you hope you're doing is to help the reader not only understand the writer, but to situate themselves alongside that writer. And so I was thinking especially of two audiences. Obviously, one, any person who wants to have an understanding of the racial condition and what it means to yield to the spirit in the face of that. But and therefore, you know, the entire congregation, entire congregation there at Duke Chapel, but everywhere. But also, as Luke has pointed out, that student of preaching, that person who has decided that they are going to mount that pulpit, they're going to stand behind that sacred desk, and they're going to do it in ways that, first of all, don't hide their humanity. And secondly, don't work in ways that perpetuate the denial of Black humanity. And silence from the pulpits, whether we're talking about in the South, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, or where I am in Connecticut, silence from the pulpit is as guilty of perpetuating the denial of Black humanity as anybody wearing a hood or not wearing a hood and carrying a tiki torch and saying, you know, the Jews will not replace us. White power, just as deadly. And so what I wanted to do in the forward is to make sure we put in place, in terms of the reader, not only the person who's sitting there in the pew, but the person who, as we have been talking about, will someday, every week, and in fact, every day, think about, thus saith the Lord to God's people. And so, and you know, those of us, Luke and I, and Patrick, you know this very well. I mean, those of us who inhabit divinity schools, we understand that when people come to divinity school, they're already choosing a path. A path less chosen. I mean, when they come to a major university, most people think that they should be in the other parts of the university, in law school or the medical school or the business school. But when they go to the divinity school, they're like, okay, why are you doing this? And so these are people who are already taking the path less chosen. And so it's important for us to invite them into the depths of that choice. And so what Luke's book does so beautifully, and what I wanted to do in the forward, is to, again, help them see the depth of the choice you're making. But isn't it, it's the choice that all disciples of Jesus make. When we say yes to his life, yes to following him, the decision we're making is that we will allow ourselves to be haunted, to be hounded by the Holy Spirit. We'll allow ourselves to be, in a sense, to always have to ask ourselves the question, am I yielding to, as the old Baptist preacher would say, the Holy Ghost? Am I yielding or am I resisting? And I don't think anybody could read this book and come away without that question being front and center. I mean, we all know that Dr. Powery is a good, solid Pentecostal minister. And there's something beautifully Pentecostal in that classic sense of the word, but also Pentecostal in the wider theological sense of the word in this book.
Wow. Very good. Now, Dean Powery, did Dr. Jennings get it right then? That subtlety when he set up that forward for you?
Oh yeah, the yielding. I mean, it has to do with breath,
Yes.
right? It has to do with breath flowing through our bodies. Without breath, there is only death. And it's a call to breathe, right? And the yielding. And in that yielding, you can't help, if one yields to the Spirit as we see at Pentecost, you are stretched, expanded to the ends of the earth, beyond yourself. And even when we hear in Acts, it's a power, dunamis, it's dynamite, it's explosive. It's not just in a segregated silo. It's not monochrome, it's polychromatic. It's beautifully diverse, right? It's always expansive. It's always broadening, even beyond our own intellectual borders, beyond what we even know, which is why at the end of the book, in the coda, we talk about ministry and humility. And the call to be like Ezekiel. Oh, God asked Ezekiel, can these bones live? He's, oh, mortal, right? There's a reminder that you're immortal. And he responds, oh, Lord God, you know. And I think when we're engaging and yielding to the Spirit, we will go to places we've never even imagined. And I think that's the gift, that's the mystery, that's the surprise, that's the hope. That's where the life is.
It's very good. Wow. Well, now, Dr. Roy, I want to turn back to you on this. And, you know, Dr. Jennings has mentioned this. I think Dean Powery also has mentioned, you know, this notion of like racialization, racism, whiteness, becoming human, right? Makes this distinction between race and racialization. How would you describe the difference from your vantage point as you're reading the book and from the vantage point of your own work? How would you describe the difference in those two terms?
So, you know, whenever I'm asked to define race, and I'm going to do that, I always give two definitions. So I'm going to define race, and I'm going to talk about racialization at the same time. In defining race, I think about race as biological race or a biological concept of race, and socially defined race, a social construction of race, right? And one of the reasons that we in biology and genetics have so much problem with and many evolutionary biology and others, the problem with just saying race is not biological or race doesn't exist is that there is a biological conception of race. And that's why we're able to say humans don't meet those criteria for biological race. So as Luke said, and I think Dr. Jennings said earlier too, we made it up, and that's the social race, right? So when we think about biological race, or in evolutionary biology, sometimes it's referred to as subspecies, we're thinking about genetic variation within a group versus genetic variation, genetic differences between groups. And groups that have a lot of variation within, more variation within the groups than between them, those groups are not said to be, and we're not going to get into the equations, but a level of divergence below. So when we think about diversity within the group, we think about different lineages within a species. Humans, we have it's one species, it's one lineage. There are no divergences below the level of the species. There are no subspecies or races, as some would define or equate them to be. So it is a fallacy that humans can be grouped into discrete, innate, biological categories, because we don't have that level of divergence within our species. There's more similarity within the species, more diversity within the species than there is between. So this idea that there are these groups that are biologically different within the human species are not consistent with what we see in biology. So there are some species that, based on the level of divergence within the species, they're so different genetically that they could be said to have races. Humans are not there. We're way below the numbers that scientists have attached to those definitions of biological race. Socially defined race, and one of the reasons I talk about them together is that people conflate them, and that's where we have the problem, right? So socially defined race is a socio-politically constructed system. It's really a system for classifying, and we don't just classify with social race, we also rank, right? So we classify, we say there are these groups of humans and separate groups of humans, and we don't stop there. We put them in a hierarchy and we say these are at the top and these are at the bottom. And so we classify, so we create this system that classifies and ranks human beings according to subjective beliefs about shared ancestry, right? And on perceived biological similarities and differences. So we believe that there are these biological similarities and differences, and we create these categories to match those perceptions, and we rank those categories. So socially defined race is tied to biological race because socially defined race assumes that biological races exist, right? And that is a problem. But as Luke said earlier, socially defined, or somebody said earlier, socially constructed, socially defined races are real. They exist because we've created them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they have real implications for people's lives. And therein lies the problem. Racialization, then, is the process by which groups are understood as being biological races, right? So this creation of this idea that we have biological races in humans, the racialization is taking this group of humans and assuming that these biological differences exist, and we've attached these labels to them, and we call them African and white and Asian. And so that is the realization, the racialization is the process of attaching some value to these characteristics, whether they be skin color or sometimes customs, and they vary across the world. Race, as we know, is a global thing. It operates differently in different parts of the world, but the consequences are the same, no matter where you go. The consequences are the same, that the people who are at the bottom of the hierarchy are worse off than the people at the top.
Yeah.
But we often make the mistake that the people at the top who have put themselves at the top of the hierarchy are not also impacted negatively by racism, right? And that is a fallacy. We're all negatively impacted. We've all been racialized. We're all, not all minoritized in these racial groups. We're some at the ones at the top, but we're all racialized and are part of this hierarchy. And the impacts of that racialization of human groups affect all of us in negative ways. Some of us more than others, but we are all negatively affected. Our society is less well off because we've created these systems of racialization.
Yeah, it's interesting as you talk about, so much that you said there that is so powerful, important, and profound, and just really crucial and essential, to understand. And this is why I think I'm just so drawn to your work in many ways, because one of the things that you just really reminded us of is that it's impossible to talk about the concept, right, of race without also talking about racism, right? That those things are inextricably linked to one another. Right. And one of the other things that I heard you say, if I was picking up on the details correctly here, that, and I do some work and reading in philosophy of race, right? And so there are some who want to still try to make a biological turn, but they want to make it non-hierarchical, right? Or non-essentialist versions of this, right? And so what I'm hearing you say that, look, the genetic science is going to put you, is going to be problematic there, on that hand. And if you are still trying to hold on to this concept of race as a social construct, then you're going to have the ethical problems on the other side, right? So that either way you try to wrestle and deal with those kinds of issues, there's just going to be data that will kind of push back. And then when we think in this space here, this larger theological dimension that Dean Powery has raised for us, this notion of the turn to the spirit is the turn to the human, right? The kind of transcend and break up this racialized imagination and to help us reimagine with the Spirit, through the Spirit, right? Different ways of what it really means and truly to be human. And so I just really appreciate that deep analysis that you bring to the table in terms of that. That insight and perspective there.
Yeah, and the fact that we are one, right?
Right.
We are one species. We're one species. We're
Mhm.
part of the same fabric. We have common ancestry in Africa. And so it's ironic, and Luke talked about it in the book too, and it's part of even how I do my teaching and how I think about the irony that all of us have African origin, a common African origin. I just came back from South Africa a couple of days ago, and from a international meeting on genetics, and even the research, as we understand that human origins are in Africa. Now we're realizing that it's different places in Africa. So we don't even just say human origin in Africa. It's origins because the migrations within Africa, and where they're finding fossils and different artifacts in different parts of Africa that are telling us more about human migrations and origins.
That's right.
But the origins, the common origin that we have, isn't it just like God to make it be Africa, right? And what does that mean? What does that mean for how Blackness has been constructed and how so the idea that racism created race, and Luke talked about it in the book, many people don't get that.
Right.
That it's racism that created race. It's this idea that there is a hierarchy. So the racism that caused us to create these groups that we call racism, right? The ideology came, and then we created the groups to match the ideology, right? And so the relationship between race and racism often gets conflated, and people, I think, are now beginning to understand racism came first, and it made us create the groups that we call race.
Before I turn back to Dean Powery with a question, I mean, I just think that's so important, because a lot of times, and several of you have kind of referenced this already, when people hear, well, race is a social construct, they sometimes think it's not a real thing.
Right.
As if the only kinds of things in the world are natural kinds, right? But as many philosophers would suggest, there are also social kinds, right? So it is a real thing, but it's a different kind of reality that definitely impacts the lived material conditions of human beings and their ability to flourish or not, right? Depending on the ways our socio-political structures are set up here. Dean Powery, since the book was published in November, have you been surprised by any reactions to it at this point?
Surprised? I'm grateful, actually, because it's keeping a conversation going.
Yeah.
I think there's been something compelling somehow for people. And I don't know if I had any expectations. It was just an offering, and let the wind blow where it wills. And you don't know where it comes from or where it goes. And it's been that kind of thing. But we've had some ongoing conversations around the themes of the book here locally, in other places, and so there's interest. I think what's underneath some of this is there's a yearning for a new way, a new direction. We've come far in many ways, but there's a desire to go further, right? As history repeats itself in many ways, but yet we're still struggling and wrestling, for a blessing in many ways. And so, I'm just grateful for the conversation, and that will continue, and it is continuing, of what it means to become human.
Yeah.
That we never actually arrive, but it's we're becoming something, hopefully something more beautiful, something more loving, something in the Christian tradition more like Jesus, being shaped and fashioned by the Spirit, even though we are dust, right? But the dust of God.
Yeah.
And there's something, breath and dust and wind, and earth and soil. And I mean, it's so much a lot of work, even here at Duke. And I know Dr. Jennings working connected to the environment, as you said, the land.
Yes.
And so there's a deep call or connectivity, a deep communion, if you will, even with God and nature, creation. And so I'm seeing that, I'm hearing that, and I'm grateful for it.
Yeah, I mean, that deep
Yeah.
materiality, I think, is so important. And your book, captured that, right? That at least my understanding when I think about some of those opening verses in the book of Genesis, the Hebrew word tov there, or good, is speaking of inanimate aspects of, the larger created order. And so the sense is that it's not a moral good there, but a kind of value that's imputed into creation, the materiality itself. And what I really appreciate is so many times over and over again, you are connecting the work of the Spirit, not trying to abstract it from the goodness of the material world, the particularities of our bodies, right? And highlighting that. And you focused, in terms of the incarnation so much, which I thought was really important theologically, but then also this perspective of this kind of Jesus from below that was with the people, and those Thurman references, right? For the disinherited, the disenfranchised as well. And I thought it was just beautiful connections there.
Oh, yeah. Can I say something on that?
Please do.
So often, and I grew up in a Holiness Pentecostal tradition, right? I'm ordained, I'm a Baptist-costal, I guess. But so often, and this is, influence of at least Neoplatonic philosophy, this idea that to become more spiritual, I have to escape the earth. I have to escape the material world.
Yeah.
And no, I think in the Christian tradition, theological understanding is no, to become more spiritual, you have to be more incarnated, more infleshed, more in touch with the earth and your bodies and your tongues.
Right.
And it's, preachers, sometimes you hear people say before they preach, as they pray, they'll say, Lord, move me out of the way. No, it should be, Lord, make me fully present in this moment. Right? That's the work. Enfleshment is a work of the Spirit, right? In touch with the real world realities on the ground, back to dust, back to water, back to wind. And I think that's what so often I've discovered is, and historically, right, you can discard and destroy and brand bodies, Black bodies, because it was not viewed as significant for the Christian life. But I think over time, more and more, obviously, we're seeing the importance of the body as absolutely. A part of the Christian life and discipleship and following Jesus and the work. There is no incarnation without the Spirit.
That's right.
Spirit is the agent of incarnation, even of God. And so that's sort of what I'm also underneath this pushing towards.
No, that came through, I think, in a very beautiful and brilliant way. I do want to
just add something really.
Oh, please do.
And just in line with all of that, Dr. Powery, I loved the way you talked about the ethics of dust. I just loved that. It's just powerful, and the fact that we're all dust, and we're going to go back to being dust, and that we have that in common, that we are all dust, and then you call it the ethics of dust. I found that a very powerful statement.
It's underneath that is so often we think in theology writ large, there's a sense, or in the church, it's all about morality.
Right.
From my perspective, it's about mortality. It's about life and death. It's about embracing our humanity, our mortality, our dustiness, our earthiness, our breath, and our embodiment as human beings. And that's a faithful practice. Like baby Suggs, right? In Toni Morrison's novel, Beloved in the Clearing, where she tells them, love the flesh. Out yonder, they don't love it. And Sean Copeland, the theologian, calls that a liturgy of the Spirit.
Yeah. Well, I want to remind those who are in attendance this evening to, if you have questions, to please put them in the Q&A. And I think what I would like to do is maybe turn to a couple of those that are already in the queue. And just so you know, Dean Powery, I do want to allow you to have the last word after some of these Q&As questions come from the queue. And the only thing I'll ask you, just because of the with those who put on the event, that you leave me 1 minute at the end, right, to wrap up there at 8:44. We'll come back to that in due time. But let's jump to the queue here, as other questions I'm sure will be coming in. Let's see. The first question is from A.A. Bryant. And the question is, as someone blown into Duke almost 30 years ago, how might this book speak to the humanity of Black staff that are followers of Christ? The questioner says, I hear about the students and congregation. Thoughts on staff administrators?
Sure. we're all human beings. And to be honest, I mean, as I think about, and obviously there's all kinds of staff here, but if I think about our custodial staff, particularly at the chapel and at the divinity school, I mean, they make it worthwhile to be here.
Yeah.
I mean, those are my people. I'll just put it that way.
Right.
And in many ways, it's why I begin the chapters with a line from the spirituals. As our teachers, the haunting echo, that's what the spirituals are, as Du Bois would say. It's those that we think who are untaught, unfamed, unnamed, as James Weldon Johnson says in his poem about the Black Bards, who are forgotten and they're gone. Those that are unlettered actually are our professors, are our teachers. And that's the movement of the Spirit. And so for me, my hope would be is the reclamation of the humanity of our Black staff and others, Black and brown staff, those who are cleaning, wiping floors, cleaning toilets, those that are serving food. There's a reclamation of their humanity, an embrace of them through this. So most definitely, this book is relevant for them as well.
Yeah. This question is going to be for all of the panelists here. So Mary Ann Barnett asks a question. So in your work collectively, each of you here, with students in the chapel, Dean Powery, with maybe students in your classrooms, Dr. Royal and Dr. Jennings, how do you get the conversation started, for example, in response to people who say, well, I don't see race, right? This kind of colorblind approach to these issues. And maybe we could start with Dr. James. Would you be willing to start? And then Dr. Royal, and then Dr. Powery.
I just wanted to say, based on what Luke just said, Luke, thank you so much for what you said. I think that is such an important point to lift up the full humanity of those who do the work that so many others take for granted, and the ways in which people are made invisible in doing that important work. And so the fact that you have lifted that up as a part of the logic of this book, I think is so important. Well, let me just also say the difficulty here that we are facing, and this question points to it, is helping people look clearly at the racial condition and the working against what I call the anti-pedagogy of the Western world, to teach people to not see what's in front of them, to invite people to not see. And so in many ways, the question and that you raised, and what that comment that often I've heard students say over many years, on the one hand, it is a sign of that anti-pedagogy, or that, should I say, that unredeemed pedagogy of teaching people not to see what's in front of them. On the other hand, it's sometimes an honest plea to want to imagine that they can be in a world in which they are unaffected by the racial condition. And I always say to people who, especially wonderful students who with beautiful idealism flowing through them, that to want to say, I don't see race, is in many ways to place themselves in a fundamental blindness to race. But what also has to happen is to press them into a deeper reality, a deeper truth. I want you to see, and then I want you to see the possibility of freedom through the seeing. And that's the more difficult work to invite people to do. In the Western world, the great challenge for so many people who have been shaped to see themselves as white is to understand what whiteness is. And that is a problem that reaches from a high school freshman to a senior faculty near the end of an illustrious career. The ability, or should I say the inability, to take seriously their own whiteness and how to think into it and then think through it. And so part of the task is to invite people to see that plea or see that claim inside of a larger problem that we want them to address.
Very good. Thank you. Dr. Royal.
For me, I think about this in a couple of ways. And one is helping students to acknowledge what they see and to understand what they see, right? And so unless you're blind, but I have a colleague who writes about blind people seeing race, right? Blind people see race because they're socialized, they're told what to see in their blindness, right? Asaji Obasogi wrote a brief book about seeing blind people being able to see race, but acknowledging what you see and helping them understand. So I teach in my courses, most of my courses, about race and genetics and helping students there's one which I call my signature course, Race, Genomics, and Society, but that I really get into what race is, what is not, what biology and genetics tell us about it, what is socially constructed race, and help them understand the evidence that tells us that humans don't have biological race, but we have social race, and why we have the different skin colors we have, why we have the different facial features, and what is the science behind that. And so helping them to acknowledge that they see these differences, but helping them to understand what those differences mean, how those differences came to be, and what they mean or don't mean. As one who's privileged to direct a center called the Center for Truth, Racial Healing, and Transformation, one of our 4 methodologies, and this is a national movement initiated by the Kellogg Foundation. And one of the core methodologies is something called RX Racial Healing Circles that brings together people from different socially defined races to not to sit around and talk about race, but to talk about things that are common to us as humans. So the idea of RX Racial Healing Circles is to bring a diverse group of people together, sharing stories about things that relate to our common human need. And so you see somebody who looks different, who you think is so different based on what you're socialized to believe, and you hear their story and you realize, oh my goodness, we've had the same experience, you know? So it helps us see ourselves in the face of the other and helps to build community. So those approaches for me, and I integrate that in my classes as well, and help build community in my classrooms. So there are different ways of helping people to see and understand what they see, appreciating the diversity that we see, and understanding that diversity is the norm in terms of if we were all the same, we wouldn't survive as a species.
Right.
We just wouldn't. So.
Thank you. Dean.
The only thing I would add to these wonderful answers is if I'm in a theological classroom, a theological education, and someone says, I don't see race, I would take them to Pentecost. Because when someone says, I don't see race, in some ways, it's an erasure, right? And Pentecost, what we have is the embrace of particularity. We all have particularities.
Right.
In color, hair or no hair, or these kinds of, right, brothers, and these kinds of things. So And it's not, and the Spirit embraces that.
Mhm.
It's an embrace, it's not an erasure, right? But it's an embrace of our particularity and all of our variations
Yeah.
that we see. And that's a part of what it means to be a part of the human race.
Right.
And I would sort of help people unpack that. And one thing that Charmaine just said, it came to me about the face of the other, seeing the face of the other. What happens at Pentecost is that the tongue of the other is in the mouth of the other.
Mm, mm.
Because what happens at Pentecost is it's not just the gift of speech, but it's also the gift of understanding, because the other says, how is it that we hear in our own native language?
Mhm.
Right.
So the other tongue is in the mouths of the other.
Right.
And so there's a kind of communion that's happening there,
Mhm.
where the other is, I'm speaking your language.
Their language. Yes. Yes.
And so how do we not just see each other, but speak the same language in some ways? That is still beautiful and diverse, and there's an unleashing of tongues and all of that. There's a surplus.
Mhm.
But I think I would help students in a theological classroom sort of engage Pentecost around that statement.
Very good.
Good.
Another question from the queue here is from Deborah Boston. And this is specifically to Dr. Powery here. The questioner says, I'm curious as to the response of white pastors to your book. That is, if you've gotten that feedback yet, has it empowered more to truth telling from the pulpit?
I think it's too early to tell. Too early to tell. And that, I mean, that, to be honest, but I have found, even doing something locally a couple of weeks ago, that, people are open. But it's also true, I think, that I've discovered that people also don't want the truth. They can't handle the truth. They want to live a lie.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And they're in love with deception.
Mm.
And that's what I'm discovering. I mean, before this book, but I think just in general.
Mm.
So it will be a challenge. I think some will be empowered, of course,
Right. Right.
but it does take, right, the cultivation of courage.
Yeah.
And honesty and lament and all of that, truth telling, the virtues, to be formed in one's life and heart. That's what I would say to that.
Wow, very good. Let me, just for the sake of time here, let me just actually, and I'm sorry, there are a couple other questions in the queue that I would have loved to have gotten to, but time is quickly being wearing down here. And so, Dean Powery, let me just ask you this one last question for you to reflect on. And again, just so I won't get in trouble with the organizers of the event, just leave me 1 minute at least to kind of wrap up here. And then we'll maybe give opportunity for just Dr. Royal and Dr. Jennings to maybe give a kind of a last word. But how do you hope that this book speaks to our particular moment in the church, in the academy and beyond? And I think that's important, because you do talk about the fact that the church has been complicit in this racialization, process, and in many ways still trying to find its way with regard to this. And Dr. Jennings, talked about this as well. But yeah, so what is your hope that this book, or how do you hope that this book speaks to our particular moment?
I mean, I think in many ways what we're seeing in a national climate and in general, at least what comes through the media, is a kind of bouquet, if I could put it this way, a kind of a bouquet of dehumanization. That's happening.
Yeah.
The way not only the violence, but the language, the tongues, the hatred, the dehumanizing, which is why I think what's so critical about the Spirit is a humanizing spirit. And at Pentecost is a kind of rehumanization. And so for me, my hope would be is that we, as the title says, that we would learn and discover what it means to become human, more fully human. And, you know, in the church to follow the human Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah.
But not as it's very Thurman-esque in the sense, doesn't deny the divinity, but see the divinity, the emphasis on the divine and the divinity in many ways has gotten the church in trouble.
That's right.
Because the overemphasis on divinity can then ignore the humanity of Christ and then disconnect from earthly realities, the material realities like we've been talking about. And you can escape from that and do whatever you want in our public schools, right? Or in the health system or the prison system. It doesn't matter if it's only about the divine. But what I love about the Spirit is this turn to the human and particularities. And it's very much, as I talk about in the chapter on Pentecost, Peter's sermon is really an emphasis on the human Jesus on that day. And I think following the human Jesus, those whose, and where does Jesus take you? Often it's with those whose backs are against the wall, as Thurman would say. And I think that's, you know what? And even I've discovered at a place like this, in the neo-Gothic wonderland of Duke, people are not often, they're often turned off by the church institution, but many are not turned off by Jesus.
Right.
And that has been really eye-opening and confirming. And I think the Spirit nudges the church to follow Jesus and not just talk about Jesus, but do what Jesus did. And sometimes that means to follow Jesus, you might have to resist the church.
Very well said. Very well said. Dr. Royal, Dr. James, could you give us maybe 30 seconds just of a final word, anything that you want to leave with the audience here before we wrap up? Dr. Royal, maybe.
I mean, it's interesting that Luke, you know, I picked a few quotes from of these fabulous quotes, Luke, and the one you just gave was the one I thought I was going to close with. And it says, at times, there is ecclesial confusion when people are more interested in following the church than Jesus. This is a dangerous anti-spirit approach. But sometimes to follow Jesus, one has to resist the church, especially when it comes to racism and racialization. And I really think that the church is missing the mark in terms of it's not just the opportunity, and I'll say it again, responsibility with regard to race and racism. And the book has, for me, just crystallized in my mind my own role as a Christ follower, as an academic, but just as a human in this work. And so I thank you for that, Luke. This is a fascinating and just a fantastic and spirit-filled book.
Thank you. Dr. Jennings.
My final word is, first of all, thank you all for allowing me this opportunity to be with Dr. Royal and for you, Dr. Smith, and of course, with the great Dean Powrie. Of course, the final word has to be read the book. It's important to read the book. And it's important to read the book at this critical moment, especially in this country, when so many people are now straining under the weight of the history of this country and doing everything they can to push away a historical consciousness, especially for those in the church. And so I think the word for us who are in the church and those who are Christian is we must follow the command of our Savior who told us to remember. And there's something really important about remembering. Yeah. And this fine book not only helps us remember the reality of race and racism, but also to remember the reality of the Spirit that is calling us.
Very good. Well, since all good things must come to an end, since we're not at the other side of the fulfillment of the eschaton, we are out of time. And I do want to just thank the panelists for being here, for your insights, the audience for staying on and participating in this conversation discussion, and the co-sponsors of the event, which will be the Center for Christianity and Scholarship, the Department of African and African American Studies, the Forum for Scholars and Publics, and Duke Divinity School Office of Black Church Studies. I just want to let you know that a recording of this discussion will be available on the Duke Chapel website. And I just want to say again, thank you, thank you, thank you. Have a good evening, and may the Spirit of God breathe into you.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you, Patrick.
Good night.
Thank you, Dean.
Bye, everyone.